What's up, good people? Welcome back to another C# video. So before we hop into next week where we will start discussing getting our application to actually loop, I figured we take this, or I take the opportunity to do this quick flash class on the while loop, seeing that we are going to be discussing that on Monday. So currently on my screen right now, I have the syntax of what a while loop should look like. So first of all, let me explain the use for a while loop. So up until now, when we're running our application, we know that once we are done and the compiler reaches the end or the last line of code, then immediately we're done with the application. If we want to do anything again, we have to go ahead and run or start the application all over again. Well, that's not very practical in a real life sense for a user. And so we have different types of loops that allow us to repeat specific blocks of code over and over. Now, specifically the one that we're talking about again today and that we're going to talk about on Thursday's class, or Monday's class, my bad, is the while loop. Now, the while loop will execute a specific block of code as long as a specified condition is reached. So it looks very similar to the if, right? As far as the syntax here. So we start off with our while, the keyword while, followed by the parentheses, and then we have our condition that's inside. And the condition is either going to be true or it's going to be false. If it's true, and I'll go ahead and type this in here. If it's true, then it's going to execute everything inside this block of code right here. If this is not true, if the condition is not met, then it'll go ahead and pass this and it will execute this line of code. Now notice when I hover over this, it gives me a warning and it says that this code is unreachable. Now the reason this code is unreachable is because once we enter in at line 11 and we go into that while block, since it's always set to true, it's going to create what is called an infinite loop that will just loop on forever because we have not given it any sort of condition to break out of that loop. So let's see that in action. So let's say inside of here, I just print, come on, there we go. Okay, I print hello. Now, if this is an infinite loop, what would you assume is going to happen here? If your answer was that you think that hello will just continue to print to the console over and over and over again, then you are correct in that theory. But again, we should not just have theories, we should test. So I'm going to go ahead and run this and see what happens. So we'll give this a little time to fire up. All right, bring that over here. And there we go. Look at that. Hello, hello, hello. Continue, continue, continue. So we have just created an infinite loop. And the only way to get this program to stop is to exit out of here or until it fills up memory and crashes. All right, so we see that this is going to continue executing that block of code. Now, the only way to get out of this is we have to give it some sort of condition or reason, like I said, to get out of this. So then we need to set a condition. So let's say, and this is where Booleans come into play. So let's say we create a bool. and we'll call it exit loop. And we'll set this equal to true. By default, Booleans are already set equal to true, but we'll say, just to be explicit, exit loop is true, okay? So now, instead of having true, the actual value in there, we'll put exit loop inside because this also holds the value of true, right? So again, we still have our infinite loop that would still happen because this value is true, and so this still creates an infinite loop. Now, after it is printed to the console, hello, now let's say we want to tell the compiler that, hey, set exit loop to false. Once this executes once, set it to false. Once it sets it to false, it'll come back up. It'll try to look at what's happening at here at the top. It'll evaluate exit loop again, and then it will see that it's false. And once it's false, it'll have a reason to hit this next line of code. So say exit loop equals false. And notice this gets its color back. If I hover over it, it doesn't tell me that it's unreasonable because now it's going to execute this once. It's going to set the value of exit loop to false once it gets back here. And then once it loops back around and it evaluates this again, we'll see that this value holds as false. And actually, I'm going to debug that so we can see what that looks like as I step through. So go ahead and run this again. All right, here we go. So currently we are on line 12, and it says that exit loop is equal to true because we set the value to true. Now, if I step to the next line, it's going to go inside the loop. It executes the hello, and it's going to write that to the console. So now if I bring the console over, you'll see there's hello written once. Okay. Now it's going to set exit loop from true. You see that it's currently true. It's going to reinitialize the value to false. So if I go past that, now exit loop, look at that, is immediately false. And so it gets to the end of the loop. This is the end of that while loop. And then because it's still part of it, it has to go back up one more time to evaluate. And now it sees that exit loop is false. And so because this is false, it has no reason to go back inside the loop. So it should skip this altogether and go to the next line of code. And so we got here, and there it is. And then that technically exits our program, and we only get hello once. So we gave our while loop a condition as to why it needs to exit. All right, let me get rid of that. Okay, beautiful. So there are many applications and use cases of how you could use a while statement or a while loop, how it can be implemented in your code. This setting a bool and then changing it within the while loop is a very common practice. We call it setting a flag. I like to think of it as an on and off switch, right? Currently at the top at line 10, the switch is on. Once it goes through the loop, we say, all right, I want you to do this one time. It does it, and then turn that switch off so that when it comes back, it says that this while loop is turned off. Don't go back into it. That's an analogy that works for me. It may not work for you, but let's continue on. All right, so here is another example. So let's say, let's get rid of our Boolean. Let's get rid of this. Let's say that we want, let's set an integer, we'll call this counter, and we'll set it equal to 0. Get rid of that. Now, here's my test for you. I want hello to be written to the console. So here, I'll type that. Right? Hello to the console. Five times. All right. So using this as a setup, I want you to take the next few minutes figuring out how would you get hello to write to the console 5 times. So go ahead and pause the video, spend some time getting it done, and then come on back and we'll do it together. All right, so now we're back. So hopefully you were able to get it to work. If not, we're gonna go through it together. So the goal was to get hello to print to the console 5 times. So we have this counter variable here. So we'll use this counter variable as our indicator of how many times a loop has already executed, right? So if I want to make sure that this is executed 5 times, then I need to put some sort of condition inside of my while. So that condition should go as long as counter is less than or equal to the number 5. Then I want you to continue executing and printing this. But as soon as the counter variable is less or greater than 5, right? So it has to be 6. Then that's when we have our condition to break out. But notice that we have nothing that increments our counter, right? We need to have something that increments or adds 1 to our counter every time, right? We need something that gives us that little click, 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 right? So inside of here, right after it writes hello, we want it to go ahead and we are going to increment or add 1 to our counter variable. And a very quick, short syntax to do so is to use the variable that you want to increment as long as it's a number or it holds a number. And we're going to throw plus plus on the back of that. And all this is saying it's counter plus 1. So it takes whatever the current counter is and adds 1 to it. And so what this is going to do is this is going to add 1 every time so that we can keep track of our counter. All right. This looks good in theory. Let's run it and see if it actually works. So we spin it up. I'm bringing this over here. One, two, three, four, five, 6. Okay, so my math is off. We got 6 there. So in that case, it just takes a little adjustment. I think perhaps I need to get rid of the equal sign in this case. And we'll run it again, which is why it's valuable to test your code to make sure you are getting the expected results. And there we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There we go. So we got our 5. So we have our counter variable. And this is our condition that we're checking for. We're checking to make sure that counter is less than 5. As long as counter is less than 5, then we want this loop to continue doing its thing. Once counter variable becomes no longer less than 5 and it sets that value to false, then we want you to go ahead and break out of this. And that's what happens here. So there are 2 instances of how we can use the while loop. In most cases, again, if you want your entire application to be repeated, in most cases, you're going to throw the entire application inside this while loop, and then you'll have some sort of question at the end asking, hey, do you want to continue, yes or no? And then that would be the condition here. You would check based on that condition, hey, do you want to continue? Actually, let me show you that right now. So let's say inside of here, let's pretend that we'll pretend that this is our complete app above this section right here. Let me get rid of this, just so this doesn't yell at us for right now. Oh, applications running. My bad. There we go. Okay. All right. So let's pretend that that's our complete app, and then we're going to ask the question. I'll keep it simple. I'll say continue. We'll go 1 for yes and a 2 for no. All right. So we asked the user, hey, do you want to continue? Yes or no? Give me a 1 or a 2. Now, because we're not doing anything with these numbers, we're not going to add them or do anything with them. We can just take in this as a string, right? So we'll say string, I'll call it user choice equals console.readline. There we go. So now we're capturing the user's choice. And now above here, we'll have a Boolean and we'll call it keep going. Okay. So inside of here, keep going will be true. And this will continue to execute until we give it a reason not to, right? So if we ask, hey, do you want to continue? We take in their input. Now, once we take in their input, we need some sort of condition to check for. So if user input or user choice does not equal y, or nope, yes is 1, does not equal 1, the string version of 1, then we will set keep going to false. Right, so then if they give us any other number, a 2, a 3, or anything else that's not a 1, then it's going to set this value to false. Again, this is acting as our flag or our light switch. So it'll turn that light switch off. And then once it goes back up here to evaluate, it will evaluate to false and then execute the next line, right? So this piece of logic right here is what you will probably repeat at the end of all your applications if you're using the while loop in this case right here. So essentially, you would just take this as your framework and then plug your application right here so that it would just continue to repeat and then until they give you a yes or no. Now there's more that we can do that, but keeping things simple, let's just roll with this. So go ahead and run it. Let's go ahead and test this piece of code to make sure that it executes the way that we want. All right, so it asks, do you want to continue? Yes or no, right? So if we do want to continue, we'll press 1, and then we should get that question again, right? As long as we press 1, it'll continue to ask us, do you want to continue? Now, if I give it anything else but 1, a 2, that's it. It's over. Application ends. Yeah, that's it. If you want me to prove that it actually ends, I'll say put this here just so you can see end of application. Let's do that again. All right, here we go. So 1, yep, that works. Now let's say I put in a letter, G, end of application, it's over. And then I exit. So there you go. So in most cases, this is where you're going to use the while statement for, or the while loop. But again, this is another tool in your toolbox. And depending on the context of the problem you are trying to solve, you may find other uses for this. So hopefully this flash class helps get you prepared for what we're going to cover on Monday. And if you're just checking this out just because, then hopefully this was valuable. In the meantime, see you guys in the next video.